After days of surrounding the Al-Shifa hospital, Israeli forces have raided it. They say they found military infrastructure of Hamas. The US agrees that this hospital served as a command center for terrorists. Tonight, we bring you images from inside the hospital and discuss the turn this war may take next. Meanwhile, India is concerned about developments to its east. Rebels in Myanmar say military troops have surrendered or been captured in many places. In the UK, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has suffered a double whammy from the country's top court and the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who has written a scathing letter against him. Xi Jinping has landed in the US to meet Joe Biden. We'll tell you what to expect. A new arms deal between Russia and India. We have the details on the Igla-S. A man in Congo set himself on fire to tell the world about what he calls the genocide in his country. China has launched the world's fastest internet. And does your company foot the bill for your weight loss drug? We'll tell you about this new corporate package that is trending. The headlines first. North Korea tests new solid fuel engines. This is for its banned intermediate range ballistic missiles. In recent years, Pyongyang has carried out many weapons tests. The announcement coincides with a visit of a Russian delegation. The West is concerned about their growing military cooperation. France issues arrest warrant for Syria's president. Bashar al-Assad is accused of war crimes over the chemical attacks in 2013. The attacks killed more than 1,400 people near Damascus. The Syrian government has denied involvement. South Africa fines Standard Chartered for currency manipulation. The British bank will pay a fine of over $2 million. Standard Chartered was accused of colluding with others to manipulate the rand. Greenhouse gases hit a record high in 2022. The United Nations warned that the trend will continue. Three main greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide, broke records last year. The announcement comes ahead of the COP28 UN Climate Summit in Dubai. Virat Kohli scores a record 50th one-day international 100. He reached this milestone in the World Cup semi-final against New Zealand. With this, Kohli has broken Sachin Tendulkar's record of 49 ODI hundreds. And Babar Azam resigns as Pakistan's captain in all formats. This follows the team's poor showing at the World Cup. Pakistan failed to qualify for the semi-finals. They won just 4 out of their 9 matches. Azam will continue as a player in all 3 formats.
يقوم الآن الطاقم الطبي بمتابعة لوجود غبار كثيف من داخل القسم لوجود غبار كثيف في المكان.
Those pictures are from the Al-Shifa hospital, Gaza's biggest medical facility, also the main target of Israel's ground offensive. For days, Israeli forces had laid siege to it. Today, they raided the hospital. They searched the rooms and the basement. They say they found weapons and terrorist infrastructure. Israel says Hamas used this facility, so the hospital became a military target, a battleground. This is what it looks like now.
These are the damages left after an Israeli airstrike on Al-Shifa. We don't know if it is safe to move forward. I move forward a little bit to show the damage inside this department. Look at this airstrike that targeted the place where patients and doctors are. The department, as you see, the air-conditioned devices were destroyed and the devices that are needed to adjust temperature within ICU.
Israel says it was a targeted operation involving scores of soldiers. They were seen inside the emergency section, also the reception buildings of the hospital. People inside say they heard explosions and gunshots. Health workers say they shifted patients to safety.
Here, as you can see, instead of the patients being connected to the devices to save their life, we had to evict this place at all, as you can see. The paramedics were forced to evict this department to save people from Israeli airstrikes and sniping.
So what were the Israeli forces after? They say the attack was to flush out Hamas and that the soldiers operated in a specific area. More details are yet to emerge. but we've received a recording from inside the hospital. We are told this is an eyewitness account of a doctor who works at Al-Shifa. Listen in.
Yesterday early evening, they started, a really aggressive bombardment and, shooting around the hospital and within the hospital. And the sound was really horrible. You can feel that it's very near to the hospital. And then we realized that the tanks are moving around the hospital. Those who don't know what's happening, we can hear tanks moving within the hospital. We can hear continuous shooting that we hear now. But again, it's totally scary situation.
So what are these sounds, doctor? I'm hearing sounds.
It's continuous shooting from the tanks.
The Al-Shifa hospital went offline on Sunday. It stopped taking patients. When the Israeli tanks rolled in, there were 1,200 patients and health workers inside, many of them critical. Israel says it offered fuel to keep the place running, but Hamas refused. Now, this hospital is a strategic priority for the IDF. They say there's a Hamas command center inside. There are bunkers under the hospital. And that's what Israel is targeting. So for several days, troops surrounded the hospital. There were tanks and armoured vehicles and snipers in nearby buildings. Today, the Israeli forces finally went in, armed with their intel and the latest American assessment. This hospital was being used by Hamas terrorists. Washington says Hamas has what they call a command node, a command center at Al-Shifa. Listen to this.
Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, PIJ, members operate a command and control node from Al-Shifa in Gaza City. They have stored weapons there, and they're prepared to respond to an Israeli military operation against that facility.
So there are weapons at Al-Shifa and a command center of terrorists. It's important to neutralize them. At the same time, the hospital also has patients, so it's a tricky operation for Israel. The US says the patients must be protected. Earlier, easier said than done though. Israel believes there could be hostages too, under the hospital building, inside the underground tunnels. It's yet to be verified though. Of course, Hamas denies all of it. They issued another statement today. This time they're blaming the US. Hamas says the US statement on Al-Shifa is like a green light, a license for Israel to raid the hospital. And with every civilian casualty, the pressure is mounting. Like I said, it's a tricky operation for Israel. They want to show the world that they're doing their best. So today, Israel released another video. It shows IDF soldiers delivering aid to the hospital. Israel says those were medical supplies. The video was released right after reports of the raid came in. But this is not the only video doing the rounds. And this is not the only version coming out of Gaza. Here's another one. Mass graves at hospitals. These are disturbing images, so we advise viewer discretion. What you see is a mass grave at the Indonesian hospital in Gaza. Reports say there's one at Al-Shifa too. Locals have dug it to bury more than 100 bodies.
Today there was an initiative by the civilians within the hospital that the situation is horrible, and they started digging in within the hospital to bury the bodies on their own responsibilities without any arrangements by the Israeli side. Again, burying 120 bodies needs a lot of equipment. It can't be by hand made by hand efforts, and single person efforts.
These are patients who died at the hospital, either due to serious injuries or due to lack of supplies. And they don't have the resources for proper burials or the fuel to carry these bodies, hence the mass graves. Like I said, quite disturbing. These pictures are evoking anger and sympathy. But that could change. Proof of Hamas infrastructure at the Al-Shifa hospital could change the tide. It could give Israel moral ammunition to take this fight to the finish. It's day 40 of the war, missiles and tanks in action in Gaza, a narrative war on social media, diplomatic battles at global forums and protests across the world, mostly pro-Palestinian protests. Even people who saw Israel as a victim on October 7th now see it as the aggressor, and it's understandable. When you see pictures of dead and injured babies, it shakes you. Why must they suffer? And you tend to forget how it all began, how Hamas launched a terror attack on Israel and how it still holds scores of people hostage. When the attack happened on October 7th, there was sympathy for Israel. But as Israel retaliated, it swiftly turned into anger. The support shifted. People came out to protest for Palestine and against the collective punishment being meted out to them. And this happened across the globe, including in the United States. But yesterday, the US witnessed something new, a march for Israel. And this is where it happened. At the National Mall in Washington, D.C., tens of thousands of people attended. Organizers say some 200,000, but by the looks of it, the numbers could be higher.
We know we again are one fighting family. Family which is so strong, which has so much love. And you know that there is only one outcome in this battle, our victory.
Now, whatever our different political beliefs and views are about what's happening overseas, you do not have to support all the policies of Israel to support and love and stand with all the people of Israel during a time of profound mourning. During a time of profound mourning. That's why I'm here.
Republicans, Democrats, actors, activists, families of hostages, everyone was present here, and they all had one message: unwavering support for Israel.
Whilst our loved ones are held captive in Gaza and our soldiers are fighting for our beloved Israel, Jews all over the world are assaulted for being Jewish. The hatred, the lies, the brutality, the disgraceful outburst of ancient anti-Semitism are an embarrassment to all civilized people and nations.
This is the largest pro-Jewish march America has seen since October 7th. And there are reasons for it. Since the beginning of the war, America's policy has been pro-Israel. But not all Americans agree with what Israel is doing. And we've seen dissent at every level. In the US State Department, in the administration, even in the White House. So Joe Biden may say that he has Israel's back, but not all his people are backing him. Take the State Department, for example. It has what many call the internal dissent channel. It was started after the Vietnam War. It allows diplomats to raise concerns, and they remain anonymous. Their concerns are addressed to the Secretary of State. In this case, Antony Blinken. He is the Secretary of State. Apparently, 3 cables have already criticized the US policy. And this was just the official criticism. Reports say the dissenting voices grew so loud that Blinken had to formally address them. So he wrote a letter to his staff. I have a quote from what it says. I also know that some people in the department may disagree with approaches we are taking or have views on what we can do better. We are listening. What you share is informing our policy and our messages. We are listening. That's what Antony Blinken is saying. But the rebellion is not limited to the State Department. More than 500 US officials have sent a letter to President Joe Biden. It slams his Israel policy. This letter calls on the president to push for a ceasefire. Clearly, the narrative has shifted against Israel, and this march in Washington, D.C. was supposed to fix it, to show that there's still support for the war, to show that Americans still backed Israel's actions. But beyond that, it was also a cry for solidarity, because in the last few weeks, America has witnessed a surge in anti-Semitism. Jews have been attacked. Between October 7th and October 23rd, there has been a surge of almost 400%. Imagine that, 400% rise in anti-Semitic incidents. And it's only getting worse. One march may not be able to change all of this, but it does send a powerful message. Vantage continues after a short break.
Cloud of smog has yet again engulfed the national capital. Remember, over the weekend we saw that there were spells of rain, which meant that the AQI in the national capital had improved significantly. But post Diwali, yet again we are seeing that the AQI in the national capital has yet again deteriorated. The main reason behind this is being said to be the manner in which the norms were flouted by the residents of the national capital even after the orders of the Supreme Court, which meant that there was a blanket ban on bursting of any sort of crackers. That was flouted significantly out here in the national capital, and that is the reason why we are seeing that the AQI out here has yet again deteriorated. Over the next few days, the IMD predicts that the AQI might improve due to the wind conditions, but if you look at the longer run over the next 1 week, the AQI is yet again going to get back into the severe category, which means that it is yet again going to be a troublesome time for the people out here in the national capital region, where yet again they would be forced to breathe in the toxic air. Now what remains to be seen as to what new arrangements or schemes can be made by the government to
Now let's talk about Myanmar, where the junta's grip on power is being tested. Rebel groups are mounting attacks. The offensive began some 3 weeks back. It has only intensified since. The rebels have inflicted heavy damage on Myanmar's military, and they're losing both outposts and people. So what is the extent of the junta's losses? At least 9 towns and more than 150 outposts and military bases. That's what they've lost. And where are these towns? 6 are in northern Myanmar and 3 in the northwest. These towns used to be military strongholds. They had local battalions here. But despite decades of control, the military could not stop the rebels. 3 groups have joined hands: Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, the Tang National Liberation Army, and the Arakan Army. And they pose a serious threat, because they haven't just taken territory, they're also seizing military assets. Reports say the region has lost 6 tanks and some armoured vehicles. The junta was caught off guard and possibly outmatched. Going by local reports, local media reports, more than 300 soldiers and militia allies have surrendered. Around 40 of them tried to escape to India. They crossed into India's Manipur state. Indian forces caught them, and they've been shipped back to Myanmar. Reports also say that the junta is struggling to respond. A counter-offensive was supposed to begin, but now it has been delayed. The military has conducted a series of airstrikes, also used heavy artillery, mostly to slow down the rebels. But these measures have been ineffective. Some troops have now been called back. They were manning smaller outposts in the north, near the areas where the rebels struck. The military has asked them to retreat, to join the forces to bigger strongholds. At bigger strongholds, rather. It seems the junta does not know what it's up against. The situation is still evolving, so the information is limited, but here's what we've been able to gather so far. The rebels have given this offensive a name, Operation 1027. And what is its goal? To challenge the rule of the army and to control a significant portion of Myanmar. As I'm sure you can tell, this is a large-scale effort. The alliance of the 3 rebel groups is called the Brotherhood Alliance. It has mobilized in large numbers. How many fighters? At least 20,000. They are said to be taking part in this operation, 20,000 people. The end game is this: to make the military regime irrelevant in Myanmar. A few days ago, the Brotherhood issued a statement. I have a copy of it with me. This is what it says, and I'm quoting. Our primary objective is launching this operation. In launching this operation are multifaceted. We are dedicated to eradicating the oppressive military dictatorship, a shared aspiration of the entire Myanmar population. So the military has a challenge on its hands. But the generals are not the only ones feeling uneasy. This offensive is a worry for India too. The rebels are fighting near the Indian border. On Monday, they went after 2 military camps. They were next to Mizoram, an Indian state in the northeast. And this situation is a tricky one. This offensive happened in the Chin state. The rebels there share close ethnic ties with the locals of Mizoram. The Mizos have ties with Myanmar's Chin community, and that has led to an influx. When the current round of violence began, more than 5,000 people from Myanmar fled to India. They came to Mizoram. and they took refuge in 2 local villages. These people are now asking for asylum, and this is a concern for India because if the violence escalates, more people could flee, and India would be forced to deal with a new refugee crisis. The rebels have the momentum right now. Looks like they won't stop anytime soon. So New Delhi is monitoring the situation, and we will keep track. Now let's move to the UK, where the political drama never seems to end. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is under attack on 2 fronts now. One is Britain's Supreme Court. The second is Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary he sacked earlier this week. Let's tell you about the court first. It has shot down the Rwanda plan, the controversial plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. The UK's top court has called it unlawful. And Braverman is roasting Rishi Sunak. She's written an open letter calling him weak and dishonest. Now, both these attacks will destabilize Sunak. His chances of re-election are already low. These attacks will further hurt him and perhaps cost him the leadership of his party, the UK Conservative Party, the Tories. In the next few minutes, we'll tell you how. First, listen to the Supreme Court judgment.
As I've explained, the legal test which has to be applied in this case is whether there are substantial grounds for believing that asylum seekers sent to Rwanda would be at real risk of refoulement. In the light of the evidence which I have summarised, the Court of Appeal concluded that there were such grounds. We are unanimously of the view that they were entitled to reach that conclusion.
This is from Britain's Supreme Court. The deport to Rwanda plan is illegal. That's what the court has said. Rwanda is a country in Central Africa. The UK struck a deal with Rwanda last year. Anyone entering the UK illegally would be sent to Rwanda. It did not matter why, where they came from, or why they were seeking refuge. The migrants would be flown to Rwanda's capital, Kigali, and their asylum applications would be handled by Rwanda. That was the deal. It was introduced last year. Boris Johnson was the UK Prime Minister then. When Rishi Sunak took over, he supported this plan. In fact, he more than supported it. He was depending on the Rwanda plan. He's made 5 promises to his supporters, Rishi Sunak. 5 promises. One of them is to tackle illegal migration, stop the small boats, as they say. That's what everyone in the government, in the Sunak government, keeps chanting. Stop the small boats. They do not want migrants. And the Rwanda scheme was their best bet. That's how they planned to stop these small boats. Sunak allegedly does not have a plan B. So the UK top court's ruling has crushed his endeavour. The first big blow Rishi Sunak was dealt today. And it comes at the worst possible time for him. Yesterday he got a no-confidence letter and then a scathing attack by Suella Braverman, the Rwanda plan's biggest backer. She was sacked on Monday, and yesterday she hit back. She wrote an open letter. She told Rishi Sunak and the world exactly what she thought of him. Let me quote a part of that letter for you. Either your distinctive style of government means you are incapable of doing so, or, as I must surely conclude now, you never had any intention of keeping your promises. That's parliamentary speak for calling Sunak either incompetent or a liar. And Braverman wrote this letter yesterday before today's Supreme Court judgment. She goes into detail about Sunak and the Rwanda plan. Let me quote again. If we lose in the Supreme Court, you will have wasted a year and an act of parliament only to arrive back at square one. Worse than this, your magical thinking, believing that you can will your way through this without upsetting polite opinion, has meant you failed to prepare any sort of credible plan B. That's Sunak's former Home Secretary, accusing him of not having a plan B to stop illegal migration. Now, this may just be a case of sour grapes. She may be lashing out after her sacking. We'll find out soon enough. But what this attack does is undermine Rishi Sunak further, and it props up Braverman. She's conveniently absolved herself of all the failure and blamed the entire Rwanda fiasco on Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. She's managed to keep her anti-immigration supporter base intact. It's a shrewd political move. It could pay dividends next year. If the Conservative Party loses the UK general election, which they're expected to, then Braverman may pounce. and it could cost Rishi Sunak both his prime ministership and control over his party. Now let's shift our attention to America. It is hosting an unexpected guest, China's President Xi Jinping. He arrived in San Francisco earlier today. In a few hours, President Xi will meet US President Joe Biden. The world will be watching this meeting. There's a lot riding on it. From military dialogue to economic ties, the agenda is expansive. But one question will be at the heart of all discussions. Can Xi Jinping and Joe Biden steer clear of conflict? Our next report tells you what to expect.
Xi Jinping doesn't like traveling these days. When the pandemic began, he socially distanced himself from the world, a practice that he still continues to this day. So there must be a very important reason for Xi Jinping to plan a trip to America right now. It isn't the friendliest of places for the Chinese president to visit. China is an arch rival of America. The Americans were quick to remind that to Xi. When he landed in San Francisco, he was greeted by protesters. There were crowds outside the luxury hotel where the Chinese president is staying. The public sentiment only highlights Xi's challenges. China's reputation isn't the best in America. After a relentless crackdown on businesses and the unexplained exit of two key ministers, there's a lack of trust, and that doesn't help Xi Jinping. One of his main priorities on this trip is to stabilize economic ties with the US. The Chinese president is already on the back foot. China is facing an economic slowdown. Youth unemployment is high, and foreign investors are pulling investment. So Xi doesn't have a lot of negotiating power. So before he landed in America, Beijing tried to strike the right tone.
中方反复呼吁尽快停火止战。
Speaking of China-US relations, the key to stabilize and improve our ties is to make concerted efforts, of which the fundamental thing is mutual respect. We hope that the United States can make concerted efforts with China and bring the relations back to the track of steady and sound development.
Thankfully for Xi Jinping, his host is in a welcoming mood. Joe Biden sought this meeting with Xi Jinping. He has good reasons to do so. There is a wave of instability sweeping the world. Conflicts are raging from Europe to West Asia. Tension with China is the last thing Biden wants before he heads into an election year. So his priority is to re-establish a hotline with Beijing.
How would you define success with your meeting with President Xi?
To get back on a normal course of corresponding, being able to pick up a phone and talk to one another if there's a crisis. Being able to make sure our military still have contact with one another.
The White House is already tempering expectations. Beyond a direct line with Xi Jinping, Biden is hoping to re-establish military-to-military contact and address some issues of mutual concern, like climate change and the global economic slowdown. But some topics are bound to stir up a heated debate, like the military tensions around Taiwan, China's claims on the South China Sea, and the issue of human rights. On these issues, Washington and Beijing aren't saying much. They probably want this meeting to end without a hitch, where both parties can leave the room without engaging in a confrontation.
And now for some news from India. From India's defense sector, to be specific. Yesterday, Russian media reported a deal, an arms deal between New Delhi and Moscow. It's for the Igla-S anti-aircraft missiles. It's a Russian staple missile. It will now be made in India. That's the deal. And this is the Igla-S, a portable shoulder launch system. One person can use it to target enemy aircraft, and the missile will do the rest. It has the ability to differentiate friend from foe. It will chase down an enemy aircraft and explode when it's close enough to take the jet down. Simple and effective. And India is quite familiar with the system. India has been using the Igla series for years. Russia first developed it in the 1980s. This was the first missile iteration, the Igla-1. And India has been buying the missiles for decades. Now, Igla-S is the newest version. The Russian armed forces inducted it in the year 2002. So not exactly the latest cutting-edge technology, but it's typical Russian equipment. older, bigger and bulkier than Western counterparts. In this case, the American Stinger missile. The Stinger is the American counter for Igla. Igla is not as light or sleek as a Stinger, but the bulky system gets the job done. That's why it's extremely popular. The Igla series is used by more than 30 countries. The list includes Armenia, Hungary, Romania, Malaysia, Singapore and Vietnam. So why has India decided to manufacture this 20-year-old, albeit popular, anti-aircraft missile? Let's look at the economics. This Igla deal, Igla-S deal, is not your usual defense purchase. It's a manufacturing deal. The Russian Igla-S missiles will be made in India under license. It's a boost to India's domestic arms industry. Remember, India is the biggest arms importer in the world. New Delhi buys weapons from practically everyone: Russia, France, the US. India has defense deals with every major arms supplier. But the ties with Russia are time-tested. Moscow is still India's biggest arms provider, accounting for 45% of India's defense imports. So this deal will be a boon. It will boost India's domestic arms industry and perhaps save on some import costs. And this is not the first time India and Russia have inked a deal like this. They signed a similar deal in 2021. Back then it was to make a gun, the AK-203. The deal was a joint venture between public sector companies, the Indian Ordnance Factory Board, and Russia's Kalashnikov concern, also Russia's sole defense export firm, Rosoboronexport. These three tied up to make the AK-203 in India. The partners in the Igla-S deal still have not been announced. It's likely to involve the Russian export firm again and KBM, that's the Russian firm that developed the Igla. What about the Indian side? All we know is that a private company will be involved. And when will the Igla-S start rolling out? No date has been given. So let's look at the AK-203 deal for answers again. That deal was inked in 2021 and production started only this year in January. So roughly a 2-year time. Of course, the AK is a gun and the Igla-S is a missile, so the timelines may differ. But the point is, don't expect made in India Iglas to roll out immediately. It takes time to set up factories after all. But again, that's a good thing. India will make the Iglas domestically. There won't be a dependency on imports. And India will not be vulnerable to supply shocks like war. The war in Ukraine has hit Russia's arms exports. It is redirecting weapons to the
remains under breathable levels, because over the past 1 week we have seen that the AQI
Good evening, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us again on Kings of Cricket. And it is once again India's moment, India's win that we're celebrating here. I'm Shivani Gupta. With me is our full cricket panel. India have done it again for the first time since 2011. They've made it to the final of the ODI World Cup. They've exercised their semi-final demons. They've also given themselves one more chance to lift that trophy at home once again. India beating New Zealand comprehensively by 70 runs. Yes, the New Zealanders didn't give up. Of course, they came as close to as they would have possibly managed on a day. There was a time when they could have taken the match away from us, but with this bowling lineup, it was always going to be an uphill task. Daryl Mitchell scored a fabulous ton. It wasn't quite enough for them. It didn't quite come with the big shots that you need and at the clip that you need when you're chasing a near 400 title. They had some resistance. The Indian bowlers faced some resistance in the middle overs till Shami got the breakthrough once again, and a double breakthrough in the 33rd over, and he stood out once again today with another 5-wicket haul and 50 plus overall wickets in World Cups. He's of course the highest wicket taker in this World Cup as well now. He's the fastest to actually reach the mark of 50 wickets in terms of balls bowled as well. So Shami has achieved this feat in just 17 matches and in 795 balls. Who can forget Virat Kohli? Of course, today was his day too. He added another feather in his cap by scoring his record 50th ODI ton. He went one forward of Sachin Tendulkar's mark of 49 centuries in 170 less matches. He in fact became the first player in the world to score 700 plus runs in a World Cup edition. So we've got the best batsman in the world and the best bowler in the world currently playing for the same team. And with that, who can doubt the results that are coming the Indian team's way? I am joined in the studio with Bohinder Aparnath, Ayaz Memon, Venkatesh Prasad, Murli Kartik, and also Graham Swan is joining us from England as well. Jimmy Paji, again a great performance from India. It was always going to be a difficult total. Against this bowling lineup, it's going to be, 50 runs added to it.
Not only 50, I think when you know you're chasing nearly 400 runs, it's not easy. You don't see many teams doing that, especially looking at the condition and the nature of the wicket. I can understand if the ball was really coming nicely onto the bat, you can connect everything. But I think all credit to New Zealand also. I think they tried their best, but they knew it was...
they made a match out of it.
They tried, yeah, because they knew by, it was a difficult target to get. What they really needed, a very, very strong start, but it didn't happen. They lost the two players very early, and the pressure was always on New Zealand.
There was a time when Williamson and Daryl Mitchell were batting and it looked like they could take the match away from us. Shami dropped Williamson in the 29th over. 3 overs later, he came back and did his, let his ball do his talking.
Yeah, he made amends by getting Williamson out. And then, 7 for 57, this is an incredible performance. It's the standout performance. We all know Kohli getting his 50th century, Iyer playing a sterling knock, everybody making a contribution, starting with Rohit and Gill and Rahul, the way he finished. But on a belter of a track, 7 for 57 is an outstanding performance, as the bowlers will tell you.
Murli Kartik, bittersweet.